Hello everyone. There's a cat and a bike tyre there, which I could have moved, but they say you should capture an audience in the first 30 seconds. I think this is pretty riveting stuff. Just switch away if you're bored. It's fine. I don't mind. So this video is a cut and shunt. Is that the right way of putting it? Basically, to summarise. I had a live talk to do in Blackpool Play Expo. This is the first live talk I'd ever done. It kind of came out of nowhere. ASHENS messaged me on Twitter asking if I'd ever thought of doing one. My answer to that was yes, I have thought of doing one because I've never done one before. He said he couldn't make it to Play Expo Blackpool, so I should do it, and he passed my name along. Unbeknownst to me, a few other people had passed my name along as well. And then it was just, okay, I guess I'm doing this now. Fuck. Oh no, I now need to think of how to do all of this, having never done one before and not really knowing the ins and outs of it. Just went with my usual thing of flying by the seat of my pants and cludging my way to victory. So one of the people who put my name forward was a guy called Mame Hayes, who you may be familiar with, or you may not. That's how the world works. He is famous for fannying around with MAME ROMs. I think that's the technical term for it. I'd never met Mame Hayes before. I've never met a lot of people before because I live in the middle of fucking nowhere. But I had to kind of organise this talk around him doing it his way, and we had a very, very small amount of time to put this together. So I took an entire week off work just so I could spend day after day after day putting stuff together for this. Mame Hayes built it in his way. I built mine in my way, which is as a video editor. I basically built a load of slides that were videos and presented it that way because it's the only way I could think to do it. But I wanted to do it on weird games, and also I had to keep in mind that nobody knows who I am. I mean, in that great pool of people at Blackpool, there was probably more famous people just wandering around than there were me doing the talk. So I had to kind of explain who I was and give a background on me, and then the same for Mame Hayes, and then go into the talk, etc., etc. And I thought I had more time than I actually did. So I prepared a lot and probably didn't even get 50% of the way through what I had prepared. So I thought, Kat, what are you doing? Well, we might as well put that to use. No, this video is going to be very different to anything else on the channel because it's not done in the same style. It was done for something completely different. But what I wanted to try and do is kind of redux the actual talk, fold that in with it being re-recorded and presented to you as an actual video. So there's a mix of both, with Mame Hayes' stuff thrown in there and everything kind of cut a bit shorter than it would have been otherwise. So I think I'll boil it down to about 30 minutes. That's still probably a lot faster than it would have been to go through it all, because it's hard doing a talk. There was a lot of technical issues, and you'll see some of those at the start. There is a bit of an explanation as to what's going on there, and that kind of burned a lot of the time that we would have had, because there's a lot of running around involved. So I guess, yeah. How long's this? 4 minutes? That's nice and snappy for an intro, isn't it? Just watch.
Welcome, everyone. Are you all well? Good. We're not going to ask you individually. So we're kludging this, I'm afraid. The wire that would have allowed the laptop that contains everything to be on this table has been taken. So the laptop is currently behind the presentation. So we will be running backwards and forwards throughout. So get used to it. Basically, it's as good a shambles as anything else. A lot of the stuff I prepared on my slides are videos that loop, and of course, blue screen. Amazing. As a professional, everything is made perfectly. There are a couple of glitches that I noticed literally yesterday morning, and being the professional I am, I went, be fine. So let me bring up slide 1. I am still here, I haven't run away. Oh yes, the other issue we've got is obviously when you're behind this, all of the controls are reversed, which makes navigating very difficult. Okay. So welcome then to Blackpool. I'm sure the question on at least 50% of your lips is, who are you people?
I am Rose-Tinted Spectrum, you can call me David or Sir David, and here on my right or left is another David. Two Davids may be a little confusing, so if you do decide to heckle any of us at any point, please ensure that you are specific about which David you're shouting at, or things will fall apart very quickly. I was invited here because ASHENS couldn't make it. Bear in mind, ASHENS has over 1 million subscribers on YouTube, and I have just over 4,000, so we're pretty close in terms of popularity. And while I'm sure no introduction is necessary for me, just in case you're unfamiliar with who these two Davids are sat in front of you, here's a little background on myself. This here is my channel, Rose-Tinted Spectrum. You'll see I do a variety of videos, including games you've never heard of, and that's why you've never heard of me. So, why did I start to do all of this, and what's my background? Well, my mum and dad weren't exactly avid gamers. Here we have literally the only photograph I have of the two of them playing anything electronic, alongside my auntie and uncle. Just look how happy my dad is there. A look I became exceptionally familiar with over the years. We grew up in Blackpool, and as such, arcades were very much a thing I was obsessed with from a very young age. Not many kids get their gaming wings from playing arcade games, but when you were born this cool, well, sometimes you're just born with style, what can I say? I presume said style was taken directly from my dad, based on this unfortunate shot, but sometimes the coolest ones don't always look cool at the time. Anyway, this was me on holiday in Lanzarote. So enamoured by the two arcade machines they had in the local bar, I apparently needed to have my picture taken with the machines because, once again, very cool child. It was at the age of 5 or so that my parents decided to nurture this obsession with computers and buy me a ZX Spectrum because they were very much a working class family and the ZX Spectrum was the cheapest thing on the market at the time. If you really want a visual indicator of how working class my family was, I think this one sums it up nicely.
That is my dad, who did not like my grandmother very much. I don't know if you can tell from his face there. Everyone's just in their underpants.
I love everything about this image. Being working class meant that when it came to buying games, there was a very strict rule throughout my entire childhood. Thou shalt not spend more than £3 on a single game. This meant that my experience with gaming at that age was specifically centred around cheap tat. My parents did not understand that there was generally a difference in quality between a game that cost £3 and a game that cost £10. There was no arguing that point, and so while everyone else was playing Jet Set Willy, I was more than likely playing Big Ben Strikes Again. If you're not familiar with that game, there is a good reason for that. I went from a ZX Spectrum to a SNES in my teens, and then later on we got a family PC, which was definitely going to be used for homework. When it wasn't being used for efficient studying, however, it was in fact a gateway to literally everything. On discovering emulation, I was able to go back and play all the stuff I'd missed, relive all the games I'd long since lost, and check out every other system I'd never got to play before. It turned an obsession into an even bigger one, and so here I am, decades later, stood in front of an audience in Blackpool talking about weird old crap. Not something I would have ever expected when I first turned on that ZX Spectrum, but here we are. For this talk in particular, I'll largely be representing the ZX Spectrum and PC gaming, which are the only two systems that are important, but I'll pass you over to the other David now to explain what on earth they're all about and where their expertise lies.
It was kind of boring. I was born in Derby, I grew up in Derby. There were no arcades in Derby. Well, there may be the odd one, but not a proper one. It's about as far away from the sea as you can. So my only experience playing arcades was really when I got to go on holiday, which was very rare because we didn't go on holiday very good as a family. So there's not much to show there. But most people will know me these days from the work I've done over the last 20 or so years, which is the work on the MAME emulator, where I've just emulated a lot of games, and many of those have been truly awful discoveries, truly weird games, things that you ask yourself, why was this made? And that's kind of why I thought Rosie would be good up here, because I thought we had that in common, that I've watched many of his videos and thought, you know what, I love the cynical takes on the games. I've got a YouTube channel, I stream, I've got my logo somewhere back here. Put my channel logo on here, it's just the one that says Mate. It's kind of a modified version of the main logo with Photoshop effects applied to it, which I thought looked kind of pink and kind of, I like pink things. There we go, this is a nice logo. So if you see this logo on YouTube with the H bar and the menu bar, it's probably something to do with it. So there we go.
I can't control it.
You can't control it. Delete it. Don't delete it. Don't delete it. That's my only compliment.
So introductions out of the way, you may well be wondering what this talk is all about. But fear not! I have produced a wonderful, informative, catchy title that will explain everything.
Video games are weird. And they should feel weird. And you should also feel a bit weird about it. A presentation. But it's also not just a presentation, it's a bit like a competition between the two hosts, but not like a massive competition or anything, just a friendly sort of competition. But basically it's just about weird games. Which brings us neatly then to round 1 of 4. Yes, games with weird subjects or subject matters. Absolutely rife on both the ZX Spectrum and the PC, but to start us off, I went to my good friend Timberwolf and asked him to submit a video with his personal choice.
I love it when games are just weird. My introduction to this was pretty much the same as my introduction to games, which was Escape from Moonbase Alpha on the Acorn Electron, a game where you search for Doctor Who while turned into a frog and being chased by evil Edna. Look, that was fine. Unless you owned any of those copyrightable entities, in which case it was probably not fine. But even in school, and British schools in the 80s had this thing where they go, this is a computer, you probably want to learn how to use that. They would show you Granny's Garden, a game which I think was mostly about teaching you the futility of resisting the expected norm. This is where I miss being in front of the live audience, because I don't know whether that got a cheer of recognition, hey, Granny's Garden, or whether that got a stunned silence and a sort of, what was going on there and why did nobody intervene? But these early games being weird kind of raises a question of, if every game is weird, can any one individual game be considered to be weird? I know this is something that Mr. Tinted Spectrum, who very kindly invited me here to waste up to 3 minutes of your time, loves about some of these early games. That the idea of what a game should be hadn't really been figured out. Sort of platforming game was just as weird an idea as game where you steal your neighbour's lawnmower, because people didn't know. What should a game be? I like this, looking back with hindsight on these periods where sort of technology advances and people still have to figure out what is it that you do with it. For example, in the wake of Doom, you got a lot of 3D games, a lot of them were first-person shooter clones, but then you got things like Gremlins Normality, a point-and-click adventure rendered in a Doom-style engine, and also a game which teaches you very much the non-futility of resisting the expected norm. But all of this has been a very elongated intro and a bit of a bait and switch, because for me, my favourite era of weird is the era when people had figured out what games should be, what they should look like, and still made them weird anyway. And that for me is associated with one particular device, this little black box. The standard bearer for weird on the PlayStation 2 was probably the 2 Katamari Damacy games which appeared on it, and We Love Katamari is one of the few games where I've consistently had people wander in while I'm playing it and go, what the curse word of choice is going on here? In terms of me associating weird with the PS2, it may be just that the PS2 had a very large library, and with a certain proportion of games being weird, that means a large number of weird games, but it did just seem to be a console where developers went, hey, we're going to let our freak flag fly. Be a dog. I'll have you know, Rise of the Triad did that in 1994. But I love this. I love that at a point where, the formulas for a successful game had been worked out. Someone goes, Oh yeah, but what if a giant ball that rolls up stuff and just really kind of gets weirder from there? Anyway, have fun with Rose-Tinted Spectrum, and don't forget to ask them about that game with the legally distinct and very definitely not Daleks. That is a weird one, even by Spectrum standards.
Timberwolf there, a man I've often described as having the perfect voice for narrating a particularly riveting video about how they make screws in a factory. It's like a sea of calm, but also informative. Anyway, check him out, he's on the internet and that.
However, did anyone know what game he was talking about at the end there? Highway Encounter? Anyone come across that? You are literally a train of Daleks pushing a pyramid along a track. The fact it's not even on my list goes to show the kind of games I'm about to bring in front of you. The first game is for the ZX Spectrum though.
And that game is called Flying Train. This is the first screen of Flying Train.
Scientists say it is now possible to witness a supernova explode in slow motion, but due to powers we know nothing about, this can only be achieved in a train. Here we have Random Records now offer you the chance to go plain loco in your very own flying train. You may notice this game isn't exactly taking itself very seriously. Compounded by the next screen, press any trousers to start your test. It's not a sentence you're going to see in anything else, I don't think.
So, Flying Train was designed for the ZX81 by Chris Seavey, who you may better know as Frank Sidebottom, the most terrifying looking comedy character ever devised. This game is honestly pretty difficult to describe. It takes place over a number of levels, the first of which you have to drop the top part of your flying train onto the wheels on the track. And that's easier said than done, because a lot of the time you have to guess where the wheels are because they spawn in on top of the other wheels. Each level is bookended by a bizarre ream of text.
For the first stage of your mission into the unknown, we must take you to a top-secret seaside destination. It is here that Scammo is based with their HQ, 5 miles below the Earth's crust. Scammo, the Space City Astronaut and Monkey Organization, etc., etc.
I think you can probably already see why I picked this game as a first example, but things don't get truly weird until you end up in the time travel segment. Because of course there's a time traveling segment. And that looks like this.
I have literally no idea what is happening.
The next game on the table is something that I've not actually been able to get hold of in order to play, but I came across it a while back. And in terms of subject matter alone, I think it absolutely needs to be introduced to you all today.
Before that, can I just have a show of hands for people who believe they've had a really good game idea? No one. Not one person. What I would have gone on to say is, how many of you people out there dreamt that amazing idea?
Frogs of War is a game based on a man's dream. It was available on DOS, Windows, Amiga and Linux, and the gameplay looks a little something like this. Whatever is happening on the screen right now, your guess is as good as mine. Linus Sphinx, the developer of the game, kept having a recurring dream, one where he was a lizard man enslaved on an asteroid. He was tasked with digging tunnels using a robot, which, as you can see here, was a frog-shaped robot that spat slime. As the lizard people were rampant capitalists with no concern for their workers, they held a battle to the death in order to be promoted. This is what you're looking at on screen right now. He literally turned his dream into a game. He built the thing for DOS and Windows, then he got annoyed with Microsoft, so he removed the DOS and Windows versions and made it for Linux only instead. And he didn't just make it and move on, he continued working on the game for a number of decades. Sadly, the website that hosted it is no more, but it's only been removed in the past couple of years or so. The lizards in the game speak their own language, so you never actually know what anyone is saying, because this being a game based on a dream, it's specifically designed to not make a great deal of sense at all. It's essentially a stream of consciousness turned into a game, and you absolutely cannot fault the dedication to making something so utterly bizarre. But it's not the weirdest one on my list. There were a few runners-up, in fact. Cosmic Wartoad, a game in which you are, Cosmic Wartoad, fighting slime monsters and trying to rescue a princess in what can only be described as a virtual board game. Gribbly's Day Out, a game in which you are a single-footed frog monster who has to rescue tiny mushroom baby people from a terrifying noir black crab on an alien planet full of electric fences.
The Sentinel, which I'm sure A lot of you have probably already played. How do you describe the Sentinel? You basically try not to get looked at.
Streaker, a game where you literally play as an overweight naked man trapped on a space station. I don't need to say any more about that. And Zombie Dinos from Planet Zeltoid, which sounds like it should be a classic B-movie, but is, in fact, an edutainment title with a name that I presume just tried to shoehorn as many trigger words for excited children as they could muster. But none of these are as strange as my last choice, chosen mostly because the subject matter is actually based on some level of truth. The Secret of St. Bride's is a crusty old text adventure, and you'd be forgiven for thinking it's just that, but there's a weird overtone of threat about the game. That's even more concerning when you dig into who actually made the game. St. Bride's School was, for lack of a better term, a cult. Miss Martindale and her cohort here on the screen were the matriarchs of said cult. Originally called the Silver Sisterhood, they transformed a huge building in County Donegal in Ireland into a sort of kinky Victorian boarding school where people would pay them money to go and live the life of an indentured servant, effectively. Now, here's the weird twist. Part of the rules of the house was that no modern technology was allowed. Electricity was effectively banned, so you may be asking yourselves how on earth a ZX Spectrum text adventure comes out of that, and to be honest, the answer isn't particularly clear. Miss Martindale is interviewed about it, and like every good cult leader, she basically says, yeah, we make the rules, but we don't really follow them. The game itself has you waking up in the St. Bride's School, tasked with escaping before you're dealt a severe handful of corporal punishment by the school headmistress, and truthfully, I can't think of any other period in time where a group of women would decide they want to be Victorians, start a cult, move to Ireland, get people to pay them for the privilege of not using electricity, and then make a video game out of it. That, I believe, is quite literally the strangest subject matter I'm going to be able to show you.
So I will pass you then to Mame Hayes, who is going to be running backwards and forwards just like I've been, and I'm going to sit down.
Right, so I was going to start along the same lines of, if I think about it, all games are kind of weird. If you were to get a book about a yellow creature running around a maze, eating everything in sight, running away from ghosts, you would say that was a really, really weird book. But in terms of a video game, that is just your baseline normal Pac-Man that everybody expects. And that is the strange thing for me. I think that's why games appealed to me as a kid so much more than reading a book, because they were just so much more out there, so much stranger than just reading about people on a spaceship or going about their business and solving crimes. It was something that sparked the imagination and made you, well, maybe in my case, me want to also make games. But when doing arcade emulation, I've come across, say, so many weird games, and when trying to pick ones for this, it's like, is that weird enough? Is that not weird enough? So I've gone for maybe one or two of my go-to games, where if I'm trying to do a live stream and put a weird game on, one that's going to make people think, why does that exist? Who came up with that concept? And so I'm going to start with a game from, I believe, 1983. So this is Snacks and Jackson, a game by Bolly Sensei, say 1983, and it runs on frame-based hardware, so it doesn't quite have the professional look of a lot of arcade games. However, it's a very, very odd concept, and this is the game. You use a trackball to control the clown head, and the nose is bouncing up and down, and when the nose bounces up, you've got to quickly grab all the food on the screen before the nose lands on the face again. If you miss the nose, it cracks the glass behind the player. Now, there's all sorts of other things. So you've got your various meals of the day. So you start with breakfast, get dinner, lunch, evening meals, midnight snacks, and all this. And the more you think about it, the stranger it gets, because gravity is clearly not quite working here. You're going straight down the screen. Why would the nose be going that way? It should be going this way. Why is food just randomly appearing out of these hatches? What are these hatches? Also, with arcade emulation especially, we're quite often buying all PCBs, non-working PCBs, random PCBs. There's no definitive record of every arcade game made, and there's lots of boards out there of games that were half finished, many games from famous developers, prototype boards, location test boards, and sometimes You get a new ROM dump from a board that somebody's bought that they don't know what it is, and it will turn out to be a long-lost game, one that is important in some way in history. And then there are other occasions when the board that turns up isn't a long-lost game. It doesn't meet the arcade standards you'd expect. You know, arcades carry a little prestige. Instead, you end up with Uncle Pooh. This was made again in 1983 at the, when maze games were still quite popular, and you walk around as this long-bearded grandpa. I think you're trying to escape a flooded mine, I'm not sure. In terms of the hardware, it runs on similar hardware to a game called Jack the Giant Killer, and another game that I won't be looking at because if I put any footage up, we'd probably be getting kicked out and never invited back. And that is Loverboy, which, don't look it up, it's terrible. No, we're not doing that one. So it's possible that there was some similar development stuff and they just released games under multiple different names, but it's impossible to find. You do find things like this all the time, just random games we've never heard of, and that's part of the fun of working on emulation really, is not knowing what you're going to find, because until this showed up, I don't think there was any documentation of it, I don't remember seeing advertising for it, fly for it, it was just like, oh, here's a game that nobody's going to have played for 40 years, and it's this. So that was Uncle Pooh.
Next on the agenda then.
No friends, no dreams, no pocket money.
So, box art versus the description of the game versus the actual game itself. This is quite a common thing to come up against in the 80s, where games looked extremely basic, so they essentially had to hype themselves up with exciting cover art and a story that would have virtually no relation to the collection of squares bouncing around on the screen. I asked ASHENS to submit his choice.
When Mr. Rosie Specco asked me to make a video about deceptive old game boxes, one company sprang immediately to mind. Budget software publisher, The Powerhouse. Previously known as Alpha Omega, The Powerhouse distinguished itself stylistically from its previous incarnation by having incredibly cool painted covers for all its releases. Basically, they bought the rights to some of British artist Tim White's back catalogue, mostly sci-fi paperback covers, and in their early days used nothing else for their game art. They'd simply pick whichever painting they had the rights to that seemed the closest to the game. Sometimes this worked very well. White's art for Under a Calculating Star, an incredibly kinetic image of an attacking bird alien, worked perfectly for Squidge, a game about a mutant pigeon. Squidge itself doesn't work perfectly, or at all in fact, but that's not relevant here. Interestingly, Psygnosis reused the art again 4 years later for their game Obitus, but because it was Psygnosis, everyone thought Roger Dean painted it. This is Manifest Destiny, reused as the cover for Nakamoto. A contemplative alien in a spacesuit sits on a rock, looking up at the sky. What do you think this game is about? Obviously something sci-fi, maybe it's a puzzle game, and they're implying the alien is thinking about their next move, maybe? Well, let's look at the synopsis on the back of the box. This is heavy sheet, Gonzo! My Zob, you're ugly. You've got a face like an ill lizard. Throng did it, but then you did lure Davina to the Palace of Sin, but then who could resist? The only cure is Nakamoto. Try it, newt face, or spend the rest of your life looking like a squashed pea. Well, that's cleared that up, hasn't it? Okay, time to reveal what the game's actually about. Wait for it. It's a platform game set in a factory or something. There are no aliens, unless this is one, and the synopsis is complete nonsense. Absolutely ridiculous. But I think the crown of lies rests on the head of the Equalizer. Using art from Roderick at random, we see the evolution of a robot from little ape droid to librarian bot. This is clearly a game with a robot in it. The synopsis tells us: evolve, solve, equalize. Solve, evolve, equalize. It is only he with the genius skill, dexterity, IQ and reflex action who shall climb the evolutionary ladder and therefore be entitled to call himself the Equalizer. So it's a game about a robot that gets more advanced as you play. Surely. Surely? Wrong, it's a Wonder Boy knockoff. Simple as that. It features no robots or evolution whatsoever. Despicable. Before we go, we have to mention the one time a game's cover actually made it look less interesting than it was. Let us remember that this exists. Space shoot-'em-up Phalanx sold to the American public as Old Man Stebbins' banjo picking simulator or something. Well, at least it's got a spaceship in it. At least I think that's a spaceship, isn't it?
ASHENS there with a very good summation of the dark side of this particular subject, and honestly, I don't think you can really get better examples of publishers just outright lying, so I wanted to look at the other side of the coin. Games that didn't necessarily lie, but also didn't necessarily tell the truth. Let's call it harmless but slightly disappointing exaggeration.
These two games immediately sprang to mind. So, I'm sure most of you will be familiar with the first one here. The first game is Dizzy. Now, as a child, I cannot begin to tell you how long I spent looking for Phil Mitchell and his brother in a cave and never finding them.
This never happens in the game. Not only does this never happen in the game, there are literally no humanoids outside Zax the Wizard, and neither of these two people are wizards. So who are they? What do they want? Why are they on the front cover of this game that doesn't feature them? That mystery, unfortunately, will never be solved. Thankfully, however, the storyline provided for Dizzy does actually fit the game that it is, and so does POD, otherwise known as Proof of Destruction, because the inlay basically says, this is just a shooting game, which is all well and good, but you take this cover, this lovely cover full of personality, and then you slap it on top of a game that looks like this. Pod is not very good, as you can probably tell by the vomit of colours up on the screen, but while the artwork doesn't match the gameplay, it doesn't make up a load of nonsense in the inlay. There is, in fact, one specific game I have in mind for this, and in order to truly hammer home just what I'm talking about here...
That's right. Everyone's favourite bit. I need a volunteer. So, can you put one hand in the air if you have never heard of a game called Mind Out on the ZX Spectrum? You're all lying. Keep that hand in the air. Can you put another hand in the air if you can hold a pen? I made eye contact. Okay, so I need a volunteer, and it's going to be slightly more artistic. I won't make you come up here, but I will make you do it in your seat. What I want you to do is attempt to draw the description of the game. I'm bringing it round to you. Are you an artist, sir? This is going to be perfect. Here you go. Take a Sharpie, make it nice and big so I can show everyone else what you've come up with. But don't worry, it will look absolutely nothing like what they've come up with. This is the description that comes with the game. It says, I would start drawing now. Let me get in front of this. That star of stage and silver screen, Bill the Worm, is trapped. Who can forget his outstanding performances in Worm Without a Cause? Wormcom, oh no, poor Bill, oh Bill, we're coming, cried the damsels. The damsels, a host of starlets, all cloned from Bill's favourite leading lady, the glorious Nora Monroe, waves falling on a rocky shore. Except in Bill's dream, there are no waves or soft focus. It does go on. I'm coming straight to the art department. Actually more sensible than the real one. So let me just hold this up for everyone.
This is what we have here. Don't know what's happening, but I like it. We have is this a female worm? Yeah, very good. A worm over here, the sun. Everyone likes the sun.
That's Snow White.
The Snow White, okay.
Yeah.
Is this
That's a minecart.
minecart, of course.
Okay, made a fatal error. The mines are exploding mines. So, excellent work. It's got nothing on this. This is the actual cover. enter the game. Minesweeper. There you are. So well done. It's a beautiful image. I would have bought it. I'm going to pass you over to Hayes then. I'm unsure if you're going to succeed at this one.
Okay, Nichibutsu, Neon-Busan, is an arcade company. They made some well-known games in the 80s. They made games like Mooncrester that was everywhere in the arcades. But they also made a lot of mahjong games, which usually feature ladies taking their clothes off. And in the world of arcades, you didn't really have box art as such. You did have cabinet art, but they were sold to manufacturers via advertising flyers that tried to promote the game to the arcade operator who was going to install the game. Now, with Nichibutsu making the mahjong games, they seem to have contacts for a lot of models. And sometimes when they weren't making mahjong games, they still used those contacts for the art on their flyers. And I've got two examples of that. Now, this game does not have ladies stripping. This game, this one, is just a side-scrolling, walk along, shoot everything, where you play as a cop. Now, this isn't the main feature. I can't read all the Japanese, so I don't know what it says. I don't know how it is promoting the game. But again, this is not a good fit. We don't actually have the art ready for this flyer, so let's just get one of those ladies who does our mahjong flyers and put her on the flyer. And then put a secret agent there who looks like a cop and say, yeah, this is it. I mean, it's even got ladies at the top. It looks more like a mahjong flyer, but it's not a mahjong game. And they did this a few times, but I think my favourite time they did it, this is Dacola, or Dacola, which I don't know what a Dacola is, but an ostrich. What an adventure. With this awkwardly posed woman wearing the t-shirt. The game itself is by no means a bad game. It does actually feature the ostrich. This ostrich is not the random lady who seems to be trying to dress up as an ostrich. It's an actual ostrich that goes around kicking a football. So, yeah, you're running around, and if you notice, these eggs, the enemies are hatching from fried eggs. Not just like a regular egg that something might hatch from. And they're not even chickens. You've got mice hatching from fried eggs. You've got turtles hatching from fried eggs. Also, the footballs are also turtles. And if you look at the Japanese original, it does make a bit more sense. But in Japan, it was the much more ordinary looking Kick Boy. It's the same game basically. But that makes sense. That is a little boy kicking a football. I mean, you're still pushing mice with it, but relatively, that makes a lot more sense.
Next on the agenda. Yes, so, controls and controllers. I'll start you off with an introduction here from Making It.
Rosie asked me if I had anything to say on the subject of the controls of games being weird. So here goes. My first computer was the ZX81. What? You want some more? Okay, let me think. My second computer was a ZX Spectrum. No, not that one. The proper rubber-keyed original. In fact, I consider the Dead Flesh keyboard more of a controller than a keyboard. Point of fact, I could play most games on that controller better than I could type on it. Therefore, a controller, not a keyboard. Okay, can I go now? What? You want an example? Okay, but that's it, right? I need to go and do the washing up. So a good example of weird controls on the ZX Spectrum would be the groundbreaking, in my teenage bedroom, and seminal game, The Way of the Exploding Fist. One of a handful of games I owned and didn't copy, and for good reason. Games with complicated controls required in-depth instructions, which you didn't get if you were loading from a C15 you duplicated on your brother's Amstrad dual-deck hi-fi. Way of the Exploding Fist was, to me, a quantum leap in fighting games. The first home one-on-one smack 'em in the face with your foot game I had the pleasure of playing. On offer, according to the advertising of the time, which I'm sure is accurate and trustworthy, was the chance to challenge the computer facing opponents of progressively greater skill. That was cool, but the real kicker was compete with a friend. The Way of the Exploding Fist has it all. It also says, spectacular, startlingly original, epic, most televisual game I have encountered. Daily Mail. Oh wait, what? Never mind all that. What about these controls? The obvious choice for controlling a game with the ability to move instantly in 8 different directions with a modifier to double that to 16 different moves is a joystick. Well, I didn't have a joystick. When this was released, I could barely afford to buy the game at probably around £5. And so I learned to play this masterpiece on the keyboard, which, as I have previously explained, is pretty much a controller anyway. And at first glance, the controls were actually reasonably sensible in their layout. A and D move you forwards and backwards. X is crouch. W is jump. That all sounds great. E and Q are diagonal up, right and left. Z is down and left. C is down and right. And there is a fire button, which is 1, because why not? That's 9 buttons. If you carefully count your fingers, most of you will realise you have 8 of these handy button pressers and a couple of useless prehensile thumbs that do little here, especially with the fire button being up there on the number row. But with all that said, it actually kind of worked. I can remember making critical choices over which finger would go where and which of the buttons / keys would be sacrificed to secondary importance. But the best thing about this game was you could play it against a friend squeezed in front of the Spectrum in the cosiest fashion, and a total of 16 fingers and various thumbs crammed onto this microscopic controller keyboard. For a few glorious days I battled it out, punching groins, flying, kicking faces and sweeping the leg with my best mates Jason and Marcus. Then we probably got bored and played something else. Hello Blackpool!
More fun making it there. Excellent channel and a lovely chap. He mostly does things with soldering irons that I don't understand. He has, though, set me up quite nicely for this one because I want to take you all on a journey of just what it was like to play games on a ZX Spectrum when no one had quite figured out a set standard yet. Q for up, A for down, O for left, P for right and space for fire. This was generally the accepted standard for the ZX Spectrum, and it's long since been superseded by a single hand control method with WASD. This particular control scheme I like to think of as Tiger style because that's the exact position you need to get your hands in. On the flip side of that, because no one could decide if QAOP was right or not, they'd reverse things. Z, X, P and L, which I will now refer to as reverse Tiger style. There was also this horrible configuration where they'd leave an unnecessary gap between the keys just to make your hands feel needlessly uncomfortable. I like to call this method the long-clawed Tiger style on account of the massive hands you need in order to play comfortably. Then there was this monstrosity. Everything in red is left, everything blue is right. I call this method the hammer fist on account of the fact you can just smash the keyboard and it'll probably work. You tended to get this on games that didn't have a lot of controls, where the developer couldn't be bothered setting up a screen where you could define the keys yourself. This, however, was the other standard, the cursor keys, which if you've not played on a ZX Spectrum for a while, absolutely screws your head up because everything is aligned on the same row. Blue is left and right, red is up and down, and 0 is fire. Now, typically, you need to have both hands on the keyboard for this, as though you're about to get ready to play a piano with your little finger on the fire button. But that then means your right hand controls up and right, and your left hand controls down and left. I forever struggled with this as a child, and I'm not ashamed to say it still absolutely knackers my head as a 40-year-old. But fear not, everyone, for I have found the perfect solution. The Spectrum Mechanical Joystick. Priced at just £10, this would obviously have been a lot cheaper than buying a real joystick. You effectively clamp this nonsense onto your keyboard and, I guess, just hope for the best. Notice that it doesn't have a fire button, so you're still going to need to use the keyboard for that, but these were the kind of genius inventions you'd find in the pages of Sinclair magazines, presumably just built by some man in his garage. Like this thing. Having checked the address, this is literally just a residential address, and I've got to be honest, I'm not even entirely sure this thing is real because I've never seen one in real life, and you may have noticed that this image on the screen is not a photograph. It's a drawing. It's a drawing of a box with a D-pad on it. If anyone out there has ever come across one of these things, please let me know, because I am absolutely fascinated by its ergonomic brick-like design. That's enough on the ZX Spectrum though. I don't think anything can beat the PC when it comes to weird peripherals and controllers, and I could literally be here all day, so here's a few of my favourites before we get to the final one. The Alpha Grip iGrip ergonomic keyboard and trackball, which looks about as ergonomic as its unnecessarily long name. This thing was supposed to be a replacement for pretty much everything. Keyboard, mouse, controller, everything in the palm of your hand. It looks super comfortable to get to grips with, I'm sure you'll agree. The SGRL Titan Sphere, which looks like a cyborg helmet, was actually a competitor to Microsoft's Sidewinder. It failed, obviously, and these things are practically impossible to find these days because it's sold so woefully. I think when you make a controller, if someone looks at it and doesn't immediately know what it is, it's probably not a great selling point. The OpenOffice.org mouse, which, yes, is a mouse specifically designed for getting the speedrun record in OpenOffice. Who needs 2 front buttons when you can have 16? I'm sure you'll definitely remember what each of them does and your fingers won't scream with RSI. Lastly, the Microsoft Sidewinder Dual Strike, showing that even Microsoft were quite happy to make something that makes you pick up the box and say, I don't know what you are, and then put it back down. None of these, though, are a keyboard with wing mirrors. This is a keyboard with wing mirrors, designed specifically for comfort. Apparently you can still actually buy these, but this is what you end up looking like when you use one. That leads us then to the last segment. I think that's like roughly sums up what this is about. So let's get straight to it. I've recently covered this game on the channel, so I won't delve into it too deeply. This is a blatant Mortal Kombat ripoff from 1995 that was designed by a bunch of 14-year-old Canadians. It was a shareware release and sold at £30, so obviously no one ever bought it. It took them 18 months to put the game together with fully digitised characters just like its inspiration, only all the characters are just children in costumes, and one plasticine Minotaur. As I say, I've just recently covered this on my YouTube channel, wink wink, like and subscribe, wink wink, NordVPN, etc, etc. Battle of the Eras is a blatant rip-off, but blatant rip-offs have been occurring since the dawn of gaming. Case in point, both of these games are Pac-Man rip-offs, but you'll probably notice that some of them try to hide it better than others. The funny thing is, if I was looking for a Pac-Man rip-off back in the 80s, Munchman would actually be the most obvious choice here, because what on earth is happening in Bubble Trouble? Regardless, they are both just Pac-Man. All of these games are always just Pac-Man. But it's funny to see how these games either blatantly say, hello, I'm a Pac-Man, or try to sidestep that entirely and go, I'm not a Pac-Man. Here's a good showcase of the evolution of that process. All 3 of these images are the same game. I like to think of it as the childhood stage, the teenager phase, and then clearly they've been through some sort of trauma by the time they've reached the adult phase. The first one there, giving vague Pac-Man knockoff vibes with its maze design in the background. The second being slightly more effortful, even though I feel like they forgot to put the man running away, so they just added him into the sky at the last minute, and for some reason coloured him entirely yellow. And then this last one here, this one could easily fall into the categories of games versus box art, because, as I say, all of these are just a Pac-Man knockoff. The same Pac-Man knockoff, in fact. Here's the thing, though. At least they continued to put effort in, even if the game idea wasn't particularly original. Even the name has had a bit of thought put into it. Unlike, yeah, that's what that's called. Up on the screen are all of the Donkey Kong rip-offs on the ZX Spectrum I could find that had cover art. Some of that cover art is incredible, specifically the top line where you have the smuggest gorilla in the world, followed by something that looks like it's been made out of clip art, followed by a gorilla whose mouth looks like an afterthought, followed by a gorilla's face sat directly next to a pyramid for reasons that are never explained. On the final row, however, you'll notice that there are 2 Ocean games. The first one, Kong, was a knockoff, but Ocean being Ocean, they then went ahead and got an official license from Nintendo so that it could go ahead and create an officially licensed knockoff of the game that they'd already knocked off. I do like to think of retro gaming in the 80s as the absolute Wild West, and it's things like this that sum it up. Could you imagine Nintendo doing anything like this ever again? Truly a special moment in time. But we're going to stick with Ocean for my final entry. Once again, this is a knockoff, but it's a knockoff of an arcade game that also has a side order of brand deal with it. Yes, Mr. Wimpy, in which they have wholesale ripped off Burger Time, but then also got someone else involved with the theft by getting a sponsorship from Britain's favourite burger restaurant chain, Mr. Wimpy. The game itself is fine for what it is, but once again, there will never be another moment in time where a huge publisher can simply take someone else's game, ask a burger joint if they'd like to join in on the daylight robbery, and walk away without a lawsuit on their hands. It's for reasons like this I absolutely adore the sheer nonsense of retro gaming. Well, that was a fun time, wasn't it? Everyone had a jolly good, fun time. Yeah, that was my first talk. I'm not sure if I'll ever get invited back to do one, but it was good to get that experience under my belt. But it was good to get that experience under my belt, and it's positive to go through that experience, I think, and see people enjoying it. It's difficult when you're doing comedy stuff in general. I can't see if you guys are laughing or not, so I just assume that everyone is uproariously laughing at literally everything I say. Makes making videos a lot easier. That's very different live, and you just have to kind of gauge it as it goes and hope for the best. So that's what I did. I think that is the end of this video now. If we stop talking anyway, then that's just when the video ends, right?